Good evening and welcome to the Explorers Club Monday night lecture. My name is Josh Lewis and I'm the co-chair of the North Pacific Alaska chapter. I've been a member of the Explorers Club since 2002 and I live in the town of Anchorage, Alaska. And I'm pleased tonight to be introducing Sven Hawkinson Jr., Dr. Sven Hawkinson Jr., who is living in Seattle, but is from the community of Old Harbor on Kodiak Island. Additionally, I am joined by Mead Treadwell. Mead is the former chair of the North Pacific Alaska chapter and now a board member of the Explorers Club. So, fishermen, I would like to talk a little bit about you and your history. Fishermen grew up, as I said, in the community of Old Harbor. I'm going to apologize here because I'm traveling and I'm in an airport, so the background noise may be a little irritating there. But in any event, fishermen grew up in Old Harbor. He went to the University of Alaska, Fairbanks, and then studied and did his doctoral work at Harvard. Fisherman is currently working at the Burke Museum and is a professor at the University of Washington. And Mead, if you have some additional info that you'd like to share about fishermen, that would be great.
Thanks, Josh. Have a good flight. See you soon. Josh, by the way, is on his way to the fishing grounds of Bristol Bay. I'm Mead Treadwell. I'm a member of the Explorers Club board. I just want to say that the subject of tonight's talk is traditional knowledge, and Sven is a leader in the documentation, preservation, and revival of Indigenous culture, including his own Native Alaskan Sukpiaq traditions. The one thing that I really want to say about Sven is that I first met him when he gave a presentation on his Harvard thesis to a group here where he had lived with nomadic reindeer herders in the Siberian North and had done an absolutely amazing job of documenting that culture. He came home and helped start the Alutiiq Museum in Kodiak, Alaska. He joined the University of Washington as a professor of anthropology and curator of Native American collections at the Burke Museum since 2013, where he played a central role in the design of the new Burke Culture as Living Gallery from 2016 to 2019. But what you're going to hear about today is one piece of Sven's work. Dr. Hawkinson engages communities in cultural revitalization using material reconstruction as a form of scholarship and teaching. And his projects have included the reconstruction of full-size Onyx, which I may have Angyak boats from archaeological models, as well as halibut hooks, masts, paddles, and traditional processing of bear gut into waterproof material for clothing. He continues to collaborate with the community of Akiak and the Akiak Kids Camp since 2000. And through these hands-on collaborations, Sven brings traditions alive and engages students through active learning methods. His work, his body of work, made him the recipient of what is so-called Genius Grant, a MacArthur Fellowship in 2007. He won the Museums Alaska Award for Excellence in 2008. The Atom Guardians of Culture and Lifewise Leadership Award in 2012. And the work that you're about to hear tonight led Sven to being inducted in the Alaska Innovators Hall of Fame, where as a creator of the Alaska Innovators Hall of Fame at the University of Alaska, I can just tell you that we have had many, many contributions to global innovation from our traditional inhabitants, the people who have lived here in Alaska for over 10,000 years. And you'll hear about that with this boat. You could also hear about it with a kayak, the halibut hook, the trampoline, sunglasses from snow goggles. And we certainly have had a lot to contribute. And traditional knowledge, as Sven has made his life working on bringing traditional knowledge forward, has helped us dramatically understand the biology of many different wildlife, understand geology and geography with bringing forward place names that had been traditionally used in places. And of course, what I mentioned before in terms of design. So this is a tremendous addition to the Explorers Club, Sven, to have you as a member. We're delighted to have you as a lecturer tonight. Thank you very much, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Mead. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I want to acknowledge that I'm calling in from the lands of the Coast Salish people in Seattle, Washington, at the University of Washington. Again, my name is Sven Hawkinson, and I'm going to share work I've been doing probably for over 20 years, literally 20 years. I'll start with just talking about the Nanets and then the Onyx and where we're going next. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the shared screen. Let's see. And Mead, can you just tell me if the right screen pops up, because I won't be able to see.
Right now we see a globe that says local and global.
Perfect. Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you. And again, thank you very much for inviting me to share not just the research, but the work that I do. That I look at research not as research. I look at research as a way to engage with communities, to bring back knowledge that was taken away from our communities over the last couple of centuries. And so originally what I was calling it was repatriation of knowledge. But now I'm rethinking that and thinking about more of how do we celebrate this knowledge? How do we bring it back and put it back into a living context? And here I ask, how do we see each other? And what is history? For me, it is the past living in the present as lessons for our future. How have we used history to control the ongoing narrative of who, what, where, and how we live and what we know? What happens when we ask questions that are uncomfortable and challenges our knowledge, our presence, our ways of being and understanding of who we are? And then what do we do when we learn about this history, and how do we use this knowledge moving forward with each other? And here I talk about our history, our past, our present, and our responsibility, but it's also our future. And I use our in this essence that all of us, native and non-native, who live on this planet, are responsible for caring for what we have right in front of us. And for me, when I was doing my research with the Nanette reindeer herders, I feel very, very privileged to have had experienced this in my life when I was doing this work of how do we honor the knowledge of our ancestors by using what was collected by outsiders. So in my doctoral research, I lived with reindeer herders in the Yamal Peninsula, in this area here of Russia. I lived in Magadan over here, and I had done archaeology in the Kuriil Islands in 1990-91. And so I felt very lucky to have had this experience, but I got to see their way of life and experiencing reindeer herding and how they're living traditionally and what it means to them. And that opened my eyes up for looking at their culture as living, their traditional ways, language, beliefs, and heritage are all passed on in a living context. Now, I step back and I say that because where I grew up, that stuff didn't exist. It existed, but it didn't exist at the level of living it. Where I grew up in the village of Old Harbor, I spent my first 16 years in this village. And I started to learn in college about over 7,500 years of history in my village, in this area, but we don't know about it. What happened to this knowledge? What happened to this history? So my experience with the Nanettes and then coming home opened my eyes up to things that we could do to change what we do there now. So understanding history is really important for us in terms of getting a sense of who we are. On Kodiak Island itself, we rediscovered an archaeological site called Refuge Rock, or what we later learned from my mom is called a WOW, which means to be numb. That was where Russia took control of Alaska in 1784 on August 13th. And that's this site right here. And we excavated that in 1992, discovered it in 1991, excavated it in 1992, and we start to learn about this history that had been erased from our living knowledge. So Russia controlled Alaska from 1784 to 1867. And America now has it since 1867. And you can see this is the village where I grew up, right along the coast. And I started asking questions of, okay, who, where, how, what can we learn? Some of the first written texts were written by Captain Cook and in his voyage and in his officers' journals. So as I was reading those, Dr. Gordon Puller and Dr. Rick Nick were like, yeah, great, but make sure to read the officers' journals too, because they actually share more of a discussion. They write more of what really happened. So I was like, okay. So as I was reading this is in 1778, and I came across this article, this one text, and so I photographed it. And he's talking about through which we descended down a ladder made of a thick piece of wood with steps cut in it into a dark and dirty cave seemingly underground, where our noses were instantly saluted with the potent stink of putrid fish which was scattered about the house. We were welcomed into these murky caves by the master of the house and his wife and other females sitting together in one part of the hut. Having been used to many strange scenes since we left England, we spent no time in staring about us with vacant astonishment, but immediately made love to the handsomest woman in company, who, in order to make us welcome, refused us no favor, though she could grant, though her husband or father stood by. And when I read that, I didn't take made love to the handsomest woman in company as somebody just flirting with them. It was more they raped these women in front of their husbands and fathers because the men couldn't protect them. All their weapons had already been taken by the Russians. And so that history is still ongoing in terms of our community, gaining an understanding of how do we change this? We're still living with this. When I used to look at the Unangan house drawn by Weber, I loved looking at it because there's so much information in there. But after I read that and connected the dots between the drawings and what the officers were writing, this was the scene of this rape that happened after. And so I don't look at these drawings in the same way anymore, especially after reading the historical accounts. And these are observations. It's a snapshot of a past and our present. And we have to rebuild knowledge that is discussed in scattered historical accounts and collections outside of our communities. They give us a snapshot of what happened and show us what we're still dealing with in our communities. And so growing up, how we were viewed and treated, and then what was done. Change our clothes, we're civilized now. And after living with the Nanettes, when I was wearing modern clothing, I was freezing. When I went to wearing their traditional clothing with the Nanettes at 50 below, I was warm with the reindeer skins. So I'm assuming that this family was pretty cold that winter. But we're here today. My family, they run multi-million-dollar boats and they have corporations. We celebrate Christianity. We celebrate the 4th of July. We even work together to build a museum that can house our knowledges. And I had the privilege of being hired. I was there for the founding of it, and I had the privilege of being hired in 2000 after finishing my dissertation to be the director. And the first project I wrote and got a grant from was to bring this knowledge that we have in our museums out to the rural communities. So for over 13 years, I would travel for a week to every one of the villages, sharing what we've learned that year about our traditional knowledges, mass carving, bimble bowls, skins, games, weaving, and bringing that knowledge to our next generation of Alutiiq people, the Sukhbia people. And here it's about knowledge, knowing, and living. And then I also started researching with the village of Akyak, these petroglyphs that weren't removed from the island, that are still there. And when we started, we thought there were 300. We've passed over 1,369 so far that we've seen. So we're documenting these histories and stories ourselves and starting to pull out what were they talking about, what were they trying to share. Well, we don't have yet to find any Rosetta Stone for these petroglyphs. We can start to interpret the stories based on our lived knowledge from that region. But my question is, what else is out there? And while I was at the Alutiiq Museum, I had the privilege to travel to Russia, France, Germany, Spain, researching museum collections, trying to document these. And so when I found this kayak, I sketched it out from 1819. And then I came back and I worked with Alfred Nomoff to create kits. And then we worked with the villages to go out and we made over 38 model kayaks, following what Alfred Nomoff had been taught by the elders: no glue, no nails, make sure you tie it right, because then these will become models for the next generation to make full-size models. But in that research, I started asking more questions. If the Inupiat had open boats, umiaks, what did we have? And I went back to Weber's drawings and found that when they were in Prince William Sound, they drew these vessels that they were later, I later learned were called Onyx. But they disappeared from our living memory by the 1860s. So they were systematically erased. But so far, I've found 15 models scattered around the world in museums. There's 5 at the MAE, Museum of Anthropology and Ethnography in St. Petersburg, and others scattered around the world. Luckily, the Burke Museum happened to have one of them. In fact, in 2018, I found another one at the British Museum labeled as an umiak, so it's mislabeled. There's drawings that I looked at, but at the Burke Museum, when I took the job here as a curator, my goal was, okay, now I have time to bring this knowledge back. How do I learn about it? So I did 3D photogrammetry. I sketched it out, and those are all fine. But then I was like, well, why don't I do what Alfred taught me? Make kits and bring this knowledge back to the community. So I spent a year just kind of sketching, and I made a model kit. And then when I was coming back to Kodiak, I went to the Alutiiq Museum to research what they had from an archaeological site that went back 800 years to see if there's anything I could make correlations to the models. And then I went out to the village of Akyak in 2014, working with Mitch and Judy Semyonov. And in that summer, in that week, working with the youth, I had them make model Onyx, no glue, no nails, all hand tying it together and having them do this. And each one of those young men there made and worked on these Onyx over 40 hours of work. And here we ended up making 13 new model Onyx on Kodiak in 2014, probably for the first time in well over a century. But as I was doing this kind of research, I was talking with a friend of mine, and he had just recently put this bulbous bow on his vessel. I was like, oh, what does that do? He's like, well, actually, it's this bulbous bow is designed to increase the speed of the boat and decrease the energy of the fuel consumption. And it's like, wow, we already had that in our Onyx, and probably for well over 1,000 years. And so you have that ingenuity that's designed into this vessel already from our region. And for me, when I was looking at this, it's like, oh, wow, this bow is designed for heavy seas, but I didn't also understand the dynamics of it. And so that was really cool to correlate modern designs and inventions to an indigenous one where it's like, oh, we've already had that for 1,000 years, not something new. And so after we finished those models, Mitch Semyonov said, well, let's make a full size. How do we do that? Because I never built a full size Onyx. And then how do we put this knowledge back into a living context so that it's owned by the community and not forgotten? So in the fall of 2013, 2014, and then 2015, I just gathered wood. I was biking, you could see I actually cracked my frame carrying too much wood at one point on my bike back wherever I was able to collect it. And then I worked with Dr. Peter Lape, and we spent 2 weeks working in the back of the Burke Museum, carving, cutting, and processing. And anybody who came by, I was like, hey, come and stand, come and, help us plane. And so we had students, we had deans, we had professors, visitors come in, and they all helped in that process. And so we made this frame. And so I had this idea in my head. Now I know what I need to do, but mind you, I only had a week to do it, working with the community. So we dismantled that Onyx, put it away, and I flew out to Akyak. In that week, working with Mitch and Spiridon and the families that were there, we gathered wood off the beach here. We brought wood, spruce from Kodiak, a Kodiak local mill. So we're using all local materials. And in that summer, we were able to work and make frame in 2015. So we had that done. So it took us 6 days to get to this point. And then in the fall, the Burke Museum allowed me to take over a space for a month where I worked with anybody who came in, and deans and students and classes. And over the period of December, we finished up the carving, we tied everything together, and we sewed a cover on the Onyx. And then in the spring, we tested it out. So we were really lucky. I think we had just enough people to float the Onyx without it rolling. And I'll come back to that. But what was really fun is all of this knowledge, the paddles, the frame, was all based on models. That because there are no full-size Onyx that existed until this point from my tribe that I have known or seen. And I went back that spring to summer to 2016 to finish working with the community of Akyak and the Semyonov family, where we're at the Akyak Kids Camp. And everybody, it's basically all hands helping, everybody, every generation, helping with making the paddles, helping doing the tying, helping with the sewing. So it really became a community event in constructing this Onyx for the first time in over 160 years on Kodiak. And again, we were tying in as many traditions. And what was beautiful, what Mitch is doing here is all the youth that have participated in making this Onyx. He's like, all right, let's paint their hands, put them on the steering paddle. And that was really meaningful because it then connected them to this process of celebrating and bringing back this knowledge and putting it back into a living context. Because once you have the youth growing up with this knowledge, they then know to expect it to be part of what we do. So taking an Onyx that only existed in models and constructing it so that you have a full-size functioning vessel changes how we see ourselves, changes what we've been told for generations, that we are nothing but primitive savages, to getting them to see the engineering, the ingenuity that's not only designed within the Onyx, but within the paddles that propel it. Here I'm going to share a short video. And what's important is to listen to what Mitch and Judy and Spiridon are talking about.
Boats are all important. That's how we feed our families. Well, the Onyx has been a dream of ours for a long time.
The Onyx is a dream that my father had.
This is something that he's always wanted to build.
My role in building the Onyx is helping my father realize his dream.
The camp started when my husband and I first sobered up.
My parents, when they quit drinking, it's like their eyes got open to the village.
This is a culture camp. They're learning their culture while they're here. They're learning how to hunt,
How to process the food.
how to cook it, how to store it.
Showing the kids how to share cultural artwork.
And so it's the culture here of learning. This is what I see. I see a community that's healing.
So in that essence, we rolled immediately after that because one person in the back didn't understand that if you shift your weight the wrong way without letting everybody else know, it's not, we'll lose balance. And then the other thing we learned from that is you have to put about 300 pounds of ballast in these vessels. This one especially to get it low enough in the water where it won't roll. So those are lessons that we're learning as we're going. And again, you have this intergenerational learning and this experience that changes how they see themselves, but also changes how they see the world. And for me, this is essential to how do we continue this kind of practice. I just want to put in a quick plug for Josh. They help sponsor some of our camp. The camp we run is basically, we self-fund it and we try to make it so that we're able to bring a camp where the kids do things that they want to do. So we run our camp in a way that is, we call it the Akiak Kids Camp, so that the kids decide what they want to do in the morning and what they want to learn. So they're learning on their terms. If they want to go and play, they go play. If they want to go and carve, they can come and carve. They can go and sew. And then depending on their age, we'll either take them out fishing or hunting, depending on what the parents will allow us to do, or they've given us permission to do. But again, it's giving the kids the responsibility to choose what they do, and then they start to learn about what they're capable of. And here's a video that Josh Lewis helped sponsor for us to share.
If you're away from home, you feel like you're missing something. That's how I felt when I was growing up. I think it's how you feel about who you are. No, not everything comes in a day.
3, 4, 5.
You have to work for it. There's an uphill struggle no matter how you look at it.
You ready? Here I come.
This is not something to take lightly. It's too destructive to say that something's gone. That's too finite, that's too limiting. But to say that something's sleeping knowledge feels like it's not gone, but can be reawakened. And so it's the value of the learning. It's not so much their actual performance in their carving or the performance in their hunting. It's just them knowing that they have a space to be indigenous, to be elusive, to be who they are. That is the value of this camp.
What do you learn from building a boat? You design it and build it from wood you collect off the beach, and you're not putting your life in danger in really rough weather, and being able to go out and go hunting in that. It's pretty amazing.
Long ago, when the Alutiiq people would travel long distances in their skin kayaks, sometimes when they were out on the water, a storm would come up, and they would survive by lashing their kayaks together and riding out the storm together. And we as people need to do the same. We are here and present. We're a living culture.
I want them to be able to understand where they came from, where they can say, I am Alutiiq, and this is a part of our life right here.
The kids love being at camp. We allow them to make noise and be who they are and have fun and stay up late and do whatever they want to do until it's time to go to bed. To sing, to be happy. The sound of kids is an awesome thing to hear. Don't you just love to hear them?
So this repatriation of knowledge through cultural pieces, for me, collections aren't stagnant. They're living with the knowledge that's embodied within them. And they're important to our communities, not only how we learn about them, but how we share them with each other. And this is one of multiple examples that shows how valuable our histories are in the present and how we can bring cultural pieces into a living context. And so that was in 2016, 17, 18. We did all these different projects and went. But during that period, I was also working with Alfred Nomoff and documenting his knowledge about traditional kayak making. Because there's a lot of knowledge about how you gather the materials and how you understand how the wood works. And so working with him, documenting his practice and ensuring that this knowledge doesn't disappear, because he's the one of the last traditional kayak makers living. And that's something that's happening around the world is as we've replaced our vessels with plastics and fiberglass, a lot of the traditional knowledge of boat building is disappearing. But at the same time, there's a desire for communities to find ways to bring it back and put it back into a living context. And so through my position at the Burke, helping work with Alfred, we were able to purchase this kayak. And in fact, thanks to the Rockefeller Foundation, Rockefellers, they helped us sponsor his work to have this kayak now on exhibit here at the New Burke Museum. But also working with local communities here in the Coast Salish region, learning about their vessels, the shovel-nosed canoe, which is one that is used in the rivers, working with L. Charles, Tyson, and Keith. I had the privilege to document them making a shovel-nosed canoe that is now also here at the Burke for visitors to see. And then working with Peter Late and George Swanisett Sr., we were able to take this vessel, this Green River hunting canoe that was dug up from an archaeological site and make a 3D print of it. And then from there, working with him, having him select a log, shape it out, carve it out, and document that process with him and seeing how these vessels can be put back into a living context, which is now, this vessel is now here at the Burke, not the Burke, but at our boathouse that the community can use again. And so it's finding ways to bring knowledge out, help it being put back into a living context and celebrate it. So that, to me, this is the next generation in really understanding how powerful these collections are, but how we can put them back into a living context so that we all celebrate them. And again, in my position at the Burke Museum, as an Indigenous person, it's important to have these hard conversations as well. And looking at what museums represent, dealing with these legacies of colonialism. But also, yeah, we can talk about that, but how do we change? How do we build a future grounded in respect? And what is our promise to change? So really thinking about not just talking about it, but finding ways to move forward in a healthy way together so that it's not kind of churned up in this negative thing of, oh, who did what and when. All right, we can't change the past, but we can change the future together. And I come back to this where I talk about our responsibility, our heritage, our future. And I mean ours in a global sense. We all have to take responsibility to care for our world. I want to thank you for inviting me to share the work I've had the privilege to do and work I continue to do. I will stop my share screen and open it up for questions.
And I've got a number of questions to start. And Luis, if you have others to send on. But Sven,
¿Puedes ponerlo en doble pantalla ahí? ¿Están los dos?
yeah, Luis, you're giving us an echo now. Sven, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah. Sven, you recently told me that you're taking another faculty leadership position besides the work you're doing at the museum. And because you have responsibility for the study of anthropology and archaeology at the University of Washington, one of the major universities in the country in this field, how do you bring the appreciation of traditional knowledge that you've just given to us to the academy and to teaching?
I try to find ways to get my colleagues to engage and collaborate, not just consult with communities. So really trying to say, hey, it's okay to go research with, well, I think us as communities, we're done with being researched on. Come and collaborate with us. Come and have a conversation with us. Don't come in and just take stuff out. What are you bringing back? What are you contributing to the greater whole of us, all of us, and what we're doing? So really challenging our ways of doing research instead of talking at people is talking with. And how do we collaborate and not just consult? So I'm hoping to kind of share that philosophy with my colleagues, but try to do the best job I can.
Thank you. And I, as a member of the board of the Explorers Club, I can just tell you that when we began the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee, it was not because it is a current trend. It's because for many years now, many of our members have said the explored are really the explorers. That to quote you, that we're done with being researched on, we're done with being explored, and let's explore together. And there's been so much of that. So I can just say on behalf of the club that we're with you. Another question I've got, really, and this maybe go back, you showed us the place where the Russians landed in Kodiak. Do you have any idea how the migration of peoples came to Kodiak? Because you can't get there you certainly can't bring a family on a kayak very easily. Was this Onyx developed someplace else and brought to Kodiak? Do you know? What's your thought?
Well, I mean, I think that this knowledge and technology was developed over thousands of years out in the Aleutians, and as it became, more efficient, like the beautiful thing with these kayaks, the kayaks themselves, if you look at the Wenongan kayaks, the Ehiak, they're designed for speed and getting from island to island. But if you look at the Alutiiq kayaks, these are designed for carrying and moving long distances and designed for really rough seas. So I think over a period of 1,000 years, people developed and designed the technology for their region. And so when they came to Kodiak, they probably brought the kayaks, 7,500 years ago. That's the only way they can get here. So we know that these vessels are thousands of years old. As you pointed out, there's no way to get there by land because it's separated by the straits.
Will more of these Anyaks be built in Akiak?
We hope to build a bigger one in the next few years, I hope. Again, it's just getting the funding and getting the support to be able to do that. And that's the bigger challenge that we now have is finding the support to carry these projects forward.
So it'd be helpful if you explain to us, is there a particular kind of wood of the kinds of driftwood you could find on the beach, or Kodiak certainly has, it's really it's the end of the contiguous rainforest going all the way from Northern California along the Pacific coast. So you've got tall trees. What kind of binders do you use in terms of rope or gut or grass rope, or how is that done? And then tell us a little bit about the traditional skin, if you can.
So if you saw in the photographs in Onyx, there are no trees down there. Everything is driftwood. So you have to know your driftwood. I jokingly, but I'm serious about it, where I can tell you what a driftwood tree is, but at one point in my life, I couldn't tell you what the living tree was. I had no idea what spruce, spruce I knew, Doug fir, cedar, we don't have those. So I only knew those in driftwood. So I can tell you all the types of driftwood and the species of them on the beach. And so, like, for example, if you're going to make an Onyx, you want to make it out of spruce because spruce is some of the best and most pliable wood that you can get for the frames, because as you're taking the beating on the water, you want to have it so that it's flexible and flexes and moves. And then into the ties, you would use for traditionally most of the smaller stuff, they use sinew, but they use seal, the seal skins for tying. They basically make a lashing out of that. On some models, I actually saw them using baleen for some of them, for some of the ties. And for the skins, traditionally, they would use sea lions, and they preferred female sea lion skins because it had less holes and it was probably easier to work than the bulls. So that's what they would use. It would take at least 9 sea lion skins to make an Onyx.
Wow. So some of the questions, one of the viewers has asked, can you speak more about the camps and how did they come about? And you said you're looking for funding. Where does the funding come from now?
So the camps the camp actually started by Mitch and Judy Simeonov, and it was designed, they created a camp because they wanted to have a safe place for kids to be for at least a week for them just to be kids, because because of the history of alcoholism and all these other issues that sort of plagued our communities for a long time. Mitch and Judy, they don't drink, and they wanted to have a place that was safe, so they created it, and they used their own money that they'd save up, and they would go and they'd buy food. The kids would go out for a week, and then they would come back. And so the camp itself is funded through we apply for funding from the corporations, from the tribes, and then usually a lot of private donations. Like, for example, the wood from the Onyx, we got funding from somebody who just did a GoFund to help us raise the money for that. But most of the time it's just whoever happens to be around that wants to make a donation. But we try not to apply for major grants because we want to be flexible enough to where the kids, we can do what is important for the kids. Like this year, we were going to work on kayaks, but because we've had so many deaths in our villages, we're going to be carving memorial masks this summer to help with the healing process within our communities. My village alone, a village of less than 200, has had over 20 people pass in this past year. So, you know, we adjust the camp to what the needs are of the communities.
And Sven, I know that one of those people was your mom. She was a guest at my home for Josh Lewis's birthday party last year, and I had a wonderful conversation with her, and I know you must miss her. I thought she was wonderful. Our condolences. When you make the masks, tell us a little bit about that for a second. Is it the same kind of found materials? And then in some cultures in Alaska, the masks are burned or buried, and some, because there are very few preserved masks in archaeology.
Well, I mean, they are preserved. Well, there are some of the masks are burned, depending on what the communities are doing with them. But what I'm going to be doing is that actually I'm going to be going to France in July to document and photograph the Pinard collection again, so that I can actually have that information. And then what I'll do is I'll take that information and share that with the community again, at least in Akiak, and create a way to carve masks that would help us. We'd use them to heal. And yes, some of the masks might be burned. It depends on the family and what they want to do. But again, it's a way of letting go. And I think that's probably why they ended up burning those. But if you look at the masks on Kodiak, there's this guy named Alphonse Pinard. In fact, I worked with my mom for 20 years on another project, translating his text that he collected in Lutik from 1872 from Eagle Harbor. Translating those, and I'm now in the process of trying to finish up. That's why I'm going to France to finish up this project. So we have those stories and texts.
Thanks. One of the questions asked is, do you collaborate with many of our museums? You just told a couple of stories of finding your Onyx places besides Kodiak. And who are your best partners?
Well, I mean, my best partners are the communities I work with in terms of just getting knowledge to and from to them and sharing it. But I would say the best partners I've had are with museums who are open to having a discussion about what the collections mean and how we can share that knowledge with communities together. I mean, I've worked, like, for example, the Bard, the Bard College, they have an exhibit in New York right now, and they have an exhibit on one of the Onyx as well, that Tikhon Simeonov made for them. So again, it's building relationships. For example, I'm really excited to be able to go back to France to look at the masks again. I haven't been back in 13 years. And I guess I don't say I have any special relationships with one specific museum, but I try to keep an open mind and open heart about how do we work together, because they're the ones who are housing and caring for our histories. And so I try to then share what I've learned from my community with them and vice versa.
Sven, what is the relationship, or what kind of similarities have you found with the Polynesian settlement and the canoes and the restoration of traditional boats there? Is there, that was a question again from a viewer.
So with the revival of like the Hakalea and the communities really bringing their knowledge back into a living context of sailing the Pacific Ocean without, our modern technology, that traditional lived knowledge is really, really important and inspiring. In fact, one of the things I started to do is using Pinard's journals, because he kayaked from Unalaska to Kodiak, but he had 4 Unangan men who took him. And so on another project that I'm working on, working with Jim Fulford on the Tesla, he has a boat named Tesla. We went out to the Aleutians and then we retraced some of Pinard's routes. So I could start to learn about the seascape routes that the Unangan men took him, so that we can then bring that knowledge out and share it with our community, so that they, if they want to go and kayak, they can follow those routes and get between Unalaska and Kodiak safely. Yeah, so that's another project I'm working on.
That's wonderful. I turned down some high school kids who asked for a grant to go kayak from Unalaska to Kodiak, and I said I didn't think it was safe enough. So I'm glad to know that you're recovering the old routes.
Yeah.
That's fun. Just a question was asked about the deaths in your village. Was that mostly due to COVID, or
half due to COVID, some to elders, but the others, this is really hard. It's the suicides of our younger generation, and it's something that I have a hard time comprehending, because to me life is so precious. Yeah, there's been a few suicides, over half with COVID. I mean, I think a lot of it is just compounded because of the pandemic we've been in. Yeah.
On that score, the youth camps that you're working on have been replicated many places around Alaska, maybe not with the same kind of archaeological event, but spirit camps and culture camps with the intent of helping to reduce suicide. A member of our club who recently passed away, Dr. Warren Zapol at Harvard, actually had pushed very hard for more federal research support for the huge suicide rate among Native kids, especially young men in Alaska. And I hope that your work also contributes there. It's a tremendous problem and very, very sad.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think about like with the kayaks and the Onyx, reaching the young men is important, because if you can reach them and get them to see the value in themselves, then they start to see the value of life. But again, it's battling this thing that we've been told over and over and over for the last couple of generations of we're nothing but horrible people because of our primitiveness. It's like, no, it's not. It's crazy. Stop it. But for me, it's like, okay, I can say that. What if I show you to be an engineer, show you to be, an engineer making these kayaks and understanding how to make them traditionally? It really changes how you see the world. And you're like, wow, our ancestors are pretty amazing. To be able to design this vessel without glue or nails in a way that allows you to go thousands of miles safely.
In an area which is known as the mother of winds, the mother of storm, for the whole Pacific. Sven, before we close, one question I've kind of saved for the last. Actually, there's one other question that's come in, so let me pass that on. W. Henry asked, we most commonly use words such as I, we, she, he, and ours. Are we biased in favor of our own interests on Earth against those of members of other species?
Hang on, I got Henry, yes, we are. We are human species. And that's something I think we need to really think about. How do we change our mentality to stop thinking about us as being the center of the universe, to thinking about us as living on this planet in a symbiotic way? How do we change our attitudes together? And we change that by how we talk about it, as you had mentioned, but we change it by how we think about it. And thinking that we are not above any other animals, as opposed to, we're the top of the food chain. Yes, we are, but at the same time, if we don't take care of that food chain, we're not going to be here either.
So at the club, Sven, Wade Davis was the one that first really made me think about language preservation. Tell us what's going on in Kodiak Island on language preservation.
Well, I mean, right now, thank goodness the April Council Lactonin and the Lutic Museum, they've been trying, they're struggling, I should say, to create language families and teach language in the schools. But here, actually, you've given me a nice platform for me to get on my soapbox. I want us to think about, we've spent, I want to say, millions of dollars to suppress the languages over the last 200-300 years because of English only policies. And especially with the indigenous languages, and especially going into, like, my mother had to write 100 times, I will not speak Alutiiq, I will not speak Alutiiq, because she spoke Alutiiq on school grounds. And yet she continued to speak Alutiiq because she's like, I'm not going to listen to you guys. This is our language. But how can we get our government to say, okay, we are going to celebrate the languages of our nation by celebrating and supporting these communities to be able to have the funding to be able to teach the language, because we're always competing against funding to be able to hire teachers to teach it, be able to hire somebody to actually learn and then teach that language. We don't have the money because we can't compete with English. How can we hold and ask our government to say, hey, we're going to stop and we're going to actually create funding to support the learning of our languages in our nation. These are our languages, not just English, but all the languages across the United States. And if we change our attitude on how we see languages, and we look at languages as another view into understanding the world from another perspective, it makes us see the world from multiple ways. Like learning Russian, I started to think of the world in a different perspective. Learning French, the same thing. So when you learn multiple languages, you start to see the world from, I think, and see the world and understand it in different ways. And right now, we're on the cusp of having our language disappear, not from the documentation side, but from the living side. How do we say it's important for us to learn these languages, and how do we celebrate them together? And to me, that would make our nation even more diverse, but also more of a place that becomes this beacon of, hey, the United States can do this, why can't we?
Sven, I would only add to your arguments for your soapbox, that where we have documented language, it has helped us understand geography, it's helped us understand biology, it's helped us, it has pushed back the frontiers of exploration by preserving language, and I commend you to that. And I guess the question that I was going to ask and somebody else just asked is, how can we as viewers help you in this, in your various quests here?
I mean, for me, it's, well, for the work in Akiak, I mean, donations to the community of the village of Akiak, the Akiak Kids Camp, that's in Kodiak, helping them. Because I don't want the money coming to me, I want the money going to the community. To me, it's not important. It's important to get the money to where the money can then be used for the purpose of what you intended for. So that's one. And then when you are looking at legislation, looking at supporting communities, like, for example, language preservation, but also language teaching, not just preservation, language celebration, language speaking. So thinking about it from a very different perspective and supporting communities that way. Or depending on where you're at, supporting local cultural programs that allow us to celebrate our diversity and the diversity of who we all are. I mean, you think about the Explorers Club, learning about the world, and have the amazing world right here in the United States too. I mean, you don't.
Well, Sven, go ahead.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Because we've passed our witching hour, I wanted to kind of wrap up a little bit. I'd like to thank Josh Lewis and Vic Beckmeyer Lewis, our chapter chairs in the North Pacific, for not only the support they've given to your camp and the film that you showed, but also to helping others understand there's so much more to be explored here in this part of the world. And you're certainly one of our leaders. I'd like to thank Ann Passer, who is in charge of our Monday night programs at the club, for including you. We missed having you about a year ago or 2 years ago, just as we were starting on Zoom. So we're delighted that you could join us. I wanted to tell all the viewers that next Monday evening on May 24th, we have Lindy Elkins Tanton, who is director of the School of Earth and Space Exploration at Arizona State University, and the principal investigator on NASA's Psyche mission, which is going to look at an asteroid between Mars and Jupiter that has so many minerals you wouldn't need to mine any place left on Earth. But at any rate, she is going to speak about her book, A Portrait of the Scientist as a Young Woman. And that's next Monday, May 24th, at the same time as this program, 7 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. And Sven, I just have to say that it is such a pleasure to have you in this club and to have your leadership in Alaska and the Pacific Northwest, and Godspeed in your work. And for those who want to help this work, be in touch with either Josh Lewis or myself. We can help direct donations to the Akiak Kids Camp. And if you have a chance when you get to Seattle, stop by and meet Dr. Hawkinson and visit these exhibits at the Burke Museum. It's tremendous. And I'll also just recommend the Alutiiq Museum in Kodiak and the museum out in Unalaska, which has unearthed really amazing things, beautiful stone houses that were built at the time of Moses. This is a very, very rich place, and we're just only beginning to scratch the surface. And good luck in finding the Rosetta Stone on all those pictographs. That's a very exciting cause and worthy of a flag expedition. And for that, I need to sign off, but thank you again, Dr. Sven Hawkinson.
Thank you, Mead. Thank you.
Back to you, Luis.